will never be able to imitate me in someone's sleep. فَمَنْ رَآنِي فِي النَّوْمِ فَقَدْ رَآنِي. So whoever sees me in his sleep, verily he has seen me. So he then asked him, can you describe the man that you saw in your sleep? So he said, yes. He said, I saw a man that was of average build. His skin was tanned but leading to being white, closer to being white. He had a beautiful smile. His eyes were dark but wide. The characteristics of his face were beautiful. His beard filled his face to the point that it almost covered his entire neck. To the point that it almost covered his entire neck. So he stopped at that. So Ibn Abbas told him, listen to his answer. He said, لَوْ رَأَيْتَهُ فِي الْيَقَظَةِ مَا اسْتَطَعْتَ أَن تَنْعَتَهُ فَوْقَ هَذَا. If you would have seen him while you were awake, you would have not been able to describe him better than this. If you would have seen him face to face. So starting now with a more detailed description and trying to make it concise, starting with his hair. It was narrated that the Prophet ﷺ had very dark black hair. The companions narrated that when he passed away, he only had 20 white hairs in his head and his beard. And as we know, he used to dye his hair with hinna and al-kutub. He used to dye his hair, alayhi salatu wasalam, with hinna and kutub. It's a mixture of herbs that would make a dark brown color. His hair, it reached his earlobes at times. And at times it would reach his shoulders. And as we know, at times he would shave it completely, as was when he made Umrah or Hajj. So his hair would fluctuate different levels, from his earlobes to his shoulders, or sometimes being completely shaved off. His hair, as was narrated by Anas, it wasn't very curly, and it wasn't extremely straight. Rather, it was in the middle, meaning it was wavy hair. So wavy hair, try to keep the picture in your head as we go along. Wavy hair either to the earlobes or to the shoulders when he had hair. Some narrations, Aisha used to report that she used to braid the hair of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She used to braid his hair in 4 braids. And Hani, she narrated that when the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he entered Mecca, he had 4 braids with his ears visible between 2 braids on each side of his head. So 2 braids on each side of his head. In the beginning of his life, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't used to part his hair. He didn't used to part his hair in the middle, because it was the practice of the mushrikeen, of the polytheists in Mecca, to part the hair. So he avoided doing that. But after the conquest of Mecca, there are narrations that he began to part his hair after the polytheism and the disbelief ended in Mecca. His face, alayhi salatu wasalam, there's so many narrations talking about his face and the beauty of his face, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Jabir ibn Samra narrates that one day, on a day that there was a full moon, and listen to this narration. He said, on a day that it was a full moon, I went outside and I saw the Prophet of Allah standing. So I began looking at him and looking at the moon, back and forth, between the Prophet's face and between the moon. And then listen to what he says. He says, فَوَاللَّهِ لَهُوَ عِنْدِي أَحْسَنُ مِنَ الْقَمَرِ. By Allah, he was more beautiful and he was better to me than the moon. His face was more beloved to me than the moon, than that full moon. And in some narrations, Rubayya, she was asked by some of the Sahaba, they asked her, "Sifi lana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Can you describe for us the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So she answered, she said, "Ya bunayya, law ra'aytahu, ra'ayta ash-shamsa tali'a." If you would have seen him, it would be as if you were seeing the sun rising. That's the only way she was able to describe him. If you would have seen him, it would be as if you were seeing the sun rising. Imagine that. It was also narrated that he had a roundish face. He had a roundish face. Al-Bara was asked, أَكَانَ وَجْهُ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ كَالسَّيْفِ? Was the Prophet's face ﷺ like a sword, meaning long and narrow and thin? He said, لَا بَلْ كَالْقَمَرِ. No, it was like the moon. So it was a roundish shaped face. He had beautiful, dark, wide eyes, alayhi salatu wasalam. Ali said, كَانَ أَدْعَجُ الْعَيْنَيْنِ. He had dark eyes, very dark eyes. And in one narration, أَشْكَلُ الْعَيْنَيْنِ, meaning that there were very wide eyes. So he had dark, wide eyes. It would look as if he was wearing kuhl in his eyes all the time. He had thick, black, curly eyelashes, alayhi salatu wasalam. Thick, black, curly eyelashes over his eyes. And this was from the narration of Ali, كَانَ أَهْدَبُ الْأَسْفَارِ. He had thick eyelashes over his eyes. He had a large-sized mouth, so he didn't have a small-sized mouth. كَانَ ضَلِيعُ الْفَمِ. He had a large mouth. He had perfectly aligned teeth. Perfectly aligned teeth, and they were white. Until the Battle of Uhud, and until before that, when he went to give da'wah to the people of Ta'if. As we know in the famous story, when he went to call them to Islam, after his uncle had passed away, seeking to hope to gain the support of the surrounding villages of Mecca, after he traveled in that long, grueling journey, over 6,000 feet above sea level, by himself, alone, to call them to the ultimate success and good in the dunya and the akhirah, to the guidance of Islam, what was their reaction? Their reaction was, they not only rejected the invitation, but they encouraged the youth and the crazy people of the city to go out and try to harm him, and stone him, and chase him away. So he left injured and bloody, to the point that his teeth were broken, alayhi salatu wassalam. It was such a horrid scene that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent one of his soldiers, Jibreel, the angel of revelation, and he called upon him and said, Ya Muhammad, verily Allah has seen what has happened to you, and what your people have said to you. And He has here the angel of the mountains. He has sent the angel of the mountains. So order him to do whatever you want to these people. So then the angel of the mountains called out and said, Assalamu alaikum ya Muhammad, in shi'ta an utbiqa alayhim al-akhshabayn. He said, Oh Muhammad, if you wish, I will fold the two mountains of Mecca in half and crush these people in the middle. If you wish, I will fold the two mountains of Mecca in half and crush these people in the middle. Imagine, bloody and tired and alone, chased away by crazy people, and his only goal was to call them to Islam, to call them to belief in Allah in the last day. With his teeth broken, what was his answer? What was his answer? Revenge is sweet. He said, no, بل أرجو أن يخرج الله من أصلابهم. I hope that Allah will send from their offspring من يعبد الله وحده ولا يشرك به شيئا. People who will worship Allah alone and not associate partners with Him. That was his call. That was his goal. Back to the description, we got off tangent here. He was also described as having a large, wide forehead and high cheekbones, well-defined cheekbones and a large, wide forehead. And there was a tint of red in his skin. So there was a natural tint and tone of red in the skin. His beard was large and thick, as we heard in the hadith. In the narration of Ibn Abbas, a large, thick beard covering his neck, almost covering his neck. The Sahaba would narrate that we could see the beard moving from behind him when he would be leading Salah. When he'd be reciting the Quran, his beard would be visible from behind him. This is how thick his beard was. And this was his order to us, alayhi salatu wasalam. This was his order to us to grow that beard. To grow the beard and to leave the mustache. This was his order to us.